If I may, Anne, I'd like to start with you. You've been involved with content strategy since, as you pointed out, before it was content strategy, and really helped form the basis for what has become an enormous industry with a lot of foundations for this entire evolution of customer experience that's happening today. You've seen the important side of technical content from the earliest times, helping to define intelligent content and creating awareness around the need for content to live a life independent of a page or independent of a rendering. And you've written about the distinctions between the practice of content strategy and engineering. Can you talk a little bit about why the technical sides of content engineering are so distinct and worthy of independent expertise, especially when we have many practices being discussed in the market today, but among them, content strategy and content operations, as well as design and user experience, and then related disciplines like ontology and graph management. So I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on why the technical sides of content deserve particular distinction.
Well, I think sort of going back in time when we first proposed the term content engineer, there was obviously early days of content strategy and a lot of discussion about content strategy. And there were a lot of quite heated arguments about what was content strategy and what wasn't content strategy. And we started to realize that there were very distinctive roles in the content strategy. And so in designing, the customer facing content strategy and designing, the words that associate with it and all of those pieces, all incredibly important. But there was also a technical side. There was, it was like, well, how are we going to, as Aaron was saying, do personalization and dynamic delivery and you were saying earlier with the robots or the chatbots or things like that, it was how can we make content actually, just moving away from just strictly the words to the concept of we need to enable that content, we need to empower that content to get out in the way that is necessary to support our customers. So that the content itself was extremely important, the interface was extremely important, but how did we do it? And so that started to coalesce into the concept of a content engineer, someone who was passionate about content, someone who was very familiar with content, maybe grew up, many years working with content, but was also very technically adept and astute in understanding how we could use the technology of the day or push the technology of the day beyond where it was currently sitting at that point in order to deliver the experiences that we wanted to with that information. And so there was the concept of the content engineer, someone who was content and engineer. So that combined mindset, that combined individual. And it doesn't mean that some of these other things are not valuable, people developing ontologies and all of those sorts of things, they're all part of it. I think content engineer's role, just as a content strategist is a role, an ontologist is a role. When we think of content operations, it's okay, now we got to create this content on a regular basis. We got to have process and workflow and governance and all of those sorts of things associated with it. They all come together to support content and the delivery of that content. And that's why we felt at the time, and I still feel very strongly, that content engineer is a critical role in the whole content journey.
Thank you, Anne. Does anybody else on the panel have any clarifying questions or thoughts to either for Anne or thoughts to build off of what Anne was saying about the origin of the content and engineer, like peanut butter and jelly, and all of a sudden it's like Reese's Pieces. But like what? Any thoughts?
quick thought here is that another reason for this is the requirement for engineering is that you may be bringing in data from other points in the enterprise that you need to be able to incorporate into your content. And one of the things, so I'll give you an example from our own environment where game ratings are very important, right? It's important, in fact, legally required if you visit an EA site and you come to a game hub page that for the jurisdiction I am in now, what the rating is and whether there's descriptors, violence, blood, and any of that sort of thing. And it's very complex because the ratings that I see if I'm in France are going to be different than the ratings that I see if I'm in the United States. They're different jurisdictions, but that all has to be combined in the same content piece. So content engineering requires you to do, well, without content engineering, you can copy and paste that into a content management system and really hope that you keep up with all of the differences in ratings, that you're able to stay on top of it as new ratings are released.
We've seen that like literally all the time, where that scenario where one regulatory regime has to be applied across an entire distributed global enterprise, and copy and paste is the way the content gets into different content items, even though the core content is literally otherwise the same. The variation is all copied and pasted into separate items. Happens all the time today still.
Right, and no one wants that to happen, and that's one of the benefits of content engineering. With the correct content engineer support, can facilitate, right? That presumably, as in our case, that information resides in some sort of database which you can build connectors to in your content model, so that's reliably reproduced without requiring you to reproduce that content every time that you want it expressed, reducing the need for not only reducing that inefficiency, but also helping to ensure that there's not going to be data discrepancies. And you can't do any of that without a content engineering pipeline that uses a content model to say, take this data from point B, transform it, and insert it into my content in point C, right? So in order to take full advantage of the complexities of content, there's not simply describing it semantically at the point of production, but also bringing in different data points to enrich and make that content more useful, if that makes sense.
To listen in on the full Roundtable conversation and others, plus get access to more exclusive insight about omnichannel customer experiences, join the Content Order for free at simpleA.com.